Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fabulous Tuesday. As you can see, my cohort, I don't even know if that's the right word, my co-host, Steven, is not here today, and I was just too riled up about Flesh and Blood not to stream. He's out sick at the moment, but I went to my first ever Flesh and Blood tournament this weekend. It was a Road to Nationals in, I think, technically Dallas, maybe Fort Worth, I'm not sure, somewhere in there. And it was a 64-person sold-out event, and it was phenomenal. I had a great time and met a lot of really great people. And so what I wanted to do today, both for my benefit and hopefully anyone out there who either is going to Road to National events or hasn't gone yet but is wanting to, or is maybe even considering it and perhaps a little bit nervous. I have some fun stories to share. But the next thing is we're kind of back. I've played a lot of competitive games over the course of my life, I guess. I was going to say for years. But and this is the first time I took a 2-year break, essentially, and it was just because of COVID. So Destiny was the last competitive game I was playing, Star Wars Destiny. And it kind of started trailing off towards the end of 2019. Played in Worlds at the October 2019. And I even at the time, pre-pandemic, was kind of feeling a little burnt out, competing and just on the game and in general. So I wanted to take a break. And so I did after that World Championship, but then the pandemic hit. So it was my first tournament in almost 2 years. I think the World Championship, we actually, right before the pandemic, we hosted a regional for Destiny at our store. That was the last tournament I played in prior to everything kind of getting shut down. So anyways, back into the tournament mode, and it just kind of reignited everything. I haven't really been in this mode in a while. And super excited, obsessed with the game. Past couple of weeks, getting more and more focused. We've been playing Flesh and Blood regularly for the past year, but it's a little different. You know, when we're streaming and we're doing Draft and Sealed and Blitz and even Constructed since January, a little more exploratory, right? Having fun. Steven has been playing Azalea pretty much the whole time. And so it allows me, I think, some space to kind of just explore, because he's really exploring some decks. And I actually do think he's probably going to end up on Azalea for Vegas. We're going to the Calling. And watch out. I don't think she's nearly as bad as people give her credit for being. But all that said, it was things like I was playing Viscerae and I was using the Tunic instead of the Skeleton. And it's been fun. But now that we're getting down to it, right? Road to Nationals, top 4 qualify for the National Championship. XP's on the line every round. There's all kinds of, it's just a little more intense, a little more serious. And it's been super fun. And I honestly wasn't sure what to expect going to that event. Essentially, I know that the seriousness, I'm going to get this fly. The seriousness of players in this game is really high. I even saw some people chatting the past couple of weeks, wishing us the best of luck, but saying that, this will probably be more competitive than anything we've ever played. Flesh and Blood announced $1 million prize pool next year. So even the Road to Nationals with the full art Tunic, there's some serious stuff on the line. And XP matters for qualifying for stuff like Nationals, potentially. So there's a lot of people taking this really seriously. There's a ton of Magic players that are coming over. I talked to so many Magic players this weekend, just frustrated with the way Wizards of the Coast have been handling stuff, and super excited to find themselves in a totally fresh new game that they're fascinated by, that seemingly is getting a lot of the things that Wizards has decided to kind of throw away, correct. So anyways, just the expectation being that it'd be pretty serious. Had a great weekend, met a lot of really great people. If you said something nice to me this weekend, I do really appreciate it, sharing some of that with the team when I got back. And I have some specific stuff for my opponents to mention a little bit. But, I ended up going, spoiler a little bit, I ended up going 4-2. So definitely not bad. And I felt like the 2 losses that I had, which we'll talk about some of the lessons I learned, were easily preventable. There were games I could have won. I feel like I made some big mistakes in both games. Some just tactical errors. Some just literally putting the wrong card in arsenal kind of a situation. So, but after all was said and done, it was about what I expected. Right? There's a lot of really good players. There's people that are very familiar with this game. They've been playing against the meta. They've been testing the matchups, and it's very clear to watch people. And just when you're playing against an opponent who really knows what's going on, how often they're really having to think through a decision because they've just done it so many times that they start understanding these lanes. So the thing I want to do today is essentially kind of go through the process that I would naturally be going through, which is I want to talk about my Bravo deck that I was playing this past weekend. And effectively, what I learned this weekend through the event, what I'm looking to change, and a lot of that has to do less with my deck not doing what it's wanting to do, and more just seemingly a stronger grasp on the meta itself and how these decks function and what they're trying to do. And then, as importantly, what my deck is trying to do against those things. How you even begin to give yourself a chance to win some of these games. And that alt Bravo image is hilarious. I can't see the cards unless I'm really looking for. There's a little screen I can see that has them on there, so that always catches me by surprise. Anyways, so what I did last week, even after like on the side, I was getting games on Discord against different meta matches, and trying to figure out the sideboard. That was actually a totally enlightening process for me. And the way I went about that is I had a spreadsheet. Actually, you can kind of see it here. You get one sheet when you go to these tournaments. This is good awareness. You get one sheet where you can put notes about your sideboard and what your strategy is. This is my spreadsheet of my entire deck. So there's basically a column for each hero that I could possibly play against. And the first thing I did is I made those columns and I listed every card that might go in my deck. And then I went through each match and I said, okay, if I'm playing against Prism, what's the ideal stack of 60 cards for Bravo? And I did that for every hero. And that let me identify 42 cards that were in every one of my decks. And so that's what I call my core. And that's the 42 cards that are going to be in my deck regardless of my matchup. And then, I organized those columns based on the meta reports we were seeing and the decks that I expected to see. And I started honing in on the cards that I needed for like those top 6 matches. And you find some interesting stuff, like even the reality that like there might be a card that isn't the ideal card against, let's say, Azalea, a good example of an opponent I see often. But at the same time, it can kind of fill the same role. You find a card that can fill a role against Azalea that you need, but it might not be as efficient, but it also works against Prism, or it also works against Chain, a decks that you're going to expect to see. And you just keep working at this list, and then you ultimately, ideally, get to test the 60-card stack that you can make with your single sideboard against each of those matchups that you're wanting to do. And it's a whole process. But now that we're actually in tournament season, now you get to keep refining, right? I played 6 games on Saturday, had a lot of conversations. I got to watch various games happening, learned a whole bunch, had a lot of conversations on the ride home, had a lot of conversations on Discord, had a lot of text message conversations, even talking through some deck building stuff with Steven. So it's very exciting to be back in. And if you are out there and you're not sure whether or not you want to go to one of these tournaments, I highly recommend it. We have one of our staff members here who got into the game maybe a month or two ago, kind of last minute. I swear this fly is going to ruin me. Decided to go to the event on Saturday. He ended up going 2-6 or 2-4. And I asked, and he had a great time and learned, I think most importantly, learned a bunch. My first opponent, if you're out there, Rosendo, was awesome. I loved his story. I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but essentially this is his first tabletop game. He's played online games and digital card games, but then really was interested in the community aspect and getting out and interacting with people. And he was playing Bolton, which I love that hero. But I think it was his first big tournament ever. And so you have people like that. And then also at some point in the tournament, I met Brendan, who was sitting next to me. He was also playing Bravo. But the weekend before, I think he won Houston, the Road to National, using Chain. And there's a video on, I believe it's Arsenal Pass, did an interview with him. And I'll actually be looking at that deck list here because he went 9-0 in Houston. And there's just a insane range of people at these events, and I think it's just a great way to gain experience and to learn about the game. And no matter what skill level you're at, I think these events are cool to go to. The in betweens, the dinner break, the after a game, people talking about what happened and the big moves and the big mistakes and all that kind of stuff and what you're learning. That's easily one of my, and the traveling there and stuff, easily one of my favorite parts of tabletop games in the communities. So before I do dive in to anything, I do want to check in with everybody. Steven's not here. He's usually the technical person. Video looked fine. Sound, does it sound fine? And just how's everyone doing out there? And are there any heroes or decks or anything that you would really like to hear about today, or have me kind of look at? And again, I'm not. I did. I went 4-2. I'm not like lighting any. I'm not insane at this game, but I'm kind of just going like we've been doing for the past year. I'm just going through the process, and this is what's next, right? More reps, tweaking the deck, playing. I'm going to another Road to Nationals this weekend in Edmond, Oklahoma, over at Edmond Unplugged, and it's just an iterative process. You play, you gain experience, you tweak, and half of it is making your deck do what you want it to do, and then the other half is understanding the matches you're likely to face and the cards you need in your deck to give you a couple percentage points in those matches. Antonio saying, I'm undecided between Bolton and Dorinthea. I'd recommend playing the one you have the most fun with, but I do think Bolton probably is favored in this meta for one reason or another. McBobby Timmy, what are your thoughts on Levia? Think we'll see her in more top 8s? I think Levia is tough. I want to believe, I have a lot of faith in the designers of Flesh and Blood, and I want to believe that she's good enough to at least compete, right, and make the top 8. Maybe not win a ton of events, but even seeing her get one event would be pretty cool. But Steven died on that hill for a month or two, and I think ultimately the challenge of Brute generally is that they kind of live and die by the scabs. And as soon as I started trying to build for Levia, it's like, well, we have to use the cards in the Advantage Center, and we have to use scabs, because that's the only reason to go Shadow Brute is these things that are going on. And, a non-existent turn after you've saved cards to use it, hoping you're going to get at least 2 actions, is just one thing in this current meta, at least. I think the timeline of a game is very unforgiving. That's one of the things I'll talk about in Chain. Is you see it enough, right? You just keep watching it, you hear people talking about how their game went. Chain's going to shackle every turn, and we played him the past couple of weeks on stream if you want to see some examples of that. There's also tons of gameplay footage out there. He's going to shackle pretty much every turn, and then he's trying to win by shackle 6 or 7-ish, shackle 8, which means he's going to see 7 or 8 turns. And so one of the things you have to come to terms with is, can your deck not take 40 damage and deal more than 40 damage in 8 turns strictly? And if the math of your deck doesn't support that, you're probably going to have a tough time. Now, if you can go 8 turns, some decks like a Control Dash as an example, we'll look at a couple of those lists, are good about not taking a lot of damage. And so technically there are decks that can extend the game and get 10, 15 total turns in. So that means they need to do a little bit less every round. And particularly against Chain, you just need to live. If you can make it 9 or 10 turns against Chain, even 8 turns usually is enough. If you can do any amount of damage in the first 3 or 4 when Chain's a little weaker, they're just going to naturally run out of cards. So step 1 on your deck, can you deal 40 and not take 40 in 7 or 8 turns? That's the most minimum barrier I think you have to get across. Even the 2 most popular decks, and we'll look at some stats in a second, are Katsu and Chain. So I'll actually go ahead and do that real quick. Let me make sure I'm not missing any notes. Nathaniel's saying, have we tried Levia with claws yet? No, but I think that's a good, maybe necessary thing, especially against like Prism. I had my first experience this past week playing Bravo into Aura Prism, and that deck I was playing of Prism last week makes a lot more sense. I think it's literally you either swap into a bunch of Auras and less Heralds, or you're all Heralds all the time, aggro. And against Bravo, who can shut down those Heralds, like their Spectra. So like Herald of Your Edition will pop that. It's way better for you to be playing the Auras in the control game, and the Auras, to make them explode, like Merciful Retribution, I think is the name of one of those. You have to attack it. And so Bravo struggles with that because a lot of times he does one big attack. And so to remove these cards from the table, you kind of have to spend your whole turn. And we'll talk about how I approach that in this deck. But in Levia, the ability to like claw for 3 at them and then finish your turn by hitting a aura is probably pretty critical. Team Covenant in the chat. I assume that's Steven. I hope you're doing well out there. Anthony's saying such a tough match. Is that you, Steven? I'm assuming that's you on the Team Covenant account. That's nice to have you here in spirit. Yeah, Aura Prism is tough. I played against Matt from Texas on Discord last week, and man, the first couple of games, I'm glad I played them before the tournament because I played against a Prism player, and it is a tough match. We'll get to that in a second. So let's it's actually Zach. It's me. Let's take a look at the stats. So tower number 9. Shout out to you for putting this data together across all of the Road to National reports so far. I believe we have about 40 events in his system, and statistically, here's kind of the breakdown. So of the winning decks, so not the top 8. This is winning decks. 40% have been Chain. This next closest is 17.5% at Katsu. And then the 2 following that are tied, Bolton and Bravo, 2 of my favorites, 12.5%. That's right where I want him to be, which is he's obviously capable of winning, but he's not just so clearly winning that everyone's going to be playing it. So I'm happy about that. And then we finish out the list. Dorinthea, 10%, so a little less. Dash making a resurgence, 7.5%. That's not unlikely due to Matt Rogers winning the first one with it. And that's the most terrifying thing to me is Bravo. Dash is a horrible time for Bravo. And then closing up the list, we have Prism at 2.5% and Viscerae at 2.5%, which really means they both won 1 of the 40. And so I think, some notes here on the meta in general. I think Prism is less represented than people expected, in the winning circles at least. So if we bounce out and just look at the top 8s, let's look at Chain. So Chain makes up only 26% of the top 8. So that's a notable stat because he's only about a fourth of the decks in the top 8, but he's almost half of the winning decks, which means a lot of the chains that are making it to the cut are actually winning. Next, of course, we have Katsu. He's a little more even. So he makes up about 20% of the top 8, and he's winning about 18% of those. So those odds kind of carry over, which is nice. And then next closest, we have Bravo, 12.8%. So he's actually winning a little bit more, or making the cut just a pinch more than he's winning the tournaments. And Prism is 13.4% of the cut. So what that signals to me is that Prism is making the cut a decent amount of the time, and then just not winning very often. And I think that is partially because there are some matches that are presumably tougher. And you got to look for that in card games. There are some decks and heroes that are going to be really good at making the cut and less good at actually winning. And that's typically because the player skill level is higher. And a lot of times those top 8 players are just better prepared to answer anything that has a specific answer. And so that's why a lot of times you'll see decks like, I think Chain and Katsu making up the bulk of the meta. That is seemingly 60-70% of the decks in the field. Let me add that up real quick. It's about 50% of the decks in the cut. So like if you make a cut, it's a 50-50 chance you're going to play Chain or Katsu. And I think a big part of that is that they really don't have specific answers. There's not like when I'm playing Bravo, I'm kind of just hoping I don't see Dash because it's a as far as I know, from the best I can do against it. There's no cards, there's no sideboard, there's no strategy change that really makes me feel confident in that match. And so that's an easy way for Bravo to get knocked out of a tournament, right? Whereas Katsu and Chain, I think that's just less the case. People this weekend were saying that Chain struggles against Aggro Ninja. I don't necessarily believe that. I haven't tested that a lot, but it's hard for me to imagine that's the case. We were talking about it on the way home, and I'm just not sold on that. I'm curious to hear what the room has to say about that. But so that's what we're kind of looking at, right? So things that are just no shows, no wins for Reinhardt, no wins for Levia. Not exactly totally surprising. There's been 1 top 8 in this data from Levia. So she has made a cut somewhere. And the other thing that's important to note about this is I've seen some of these Road to Nationals events in the 20 to 25 player count, and then others that are in the 60 plus count. And I think that the potential of certain heroes to even make the cut, depending on those counts, is super relevant. Because a really good player playing Levia at a 24-person event, I would be curious. I don't know what the stats are, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Levia player is a good player at a smaller event. That said, I one of my favorite characters is Viscerae. And he came out and won his first event this weekend. And I have that list. Let me see if I can grab it real quick. And this is from... I don't have his name here. But he won, and he's running a Viscerae OTK deck, which is 1 turn kill. Defensive, block, 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 block. Skeleton into Sonata Arcanix to look at 10, 15 cards. I watched a couple of these matches. And you're trying to really just kill them there because you have like 20, 25 rune chants that are hitting. Then you have all these cards in hand and they have go again. It's this crazy thing. That was exciting to see because both exciting and a little disappointing. I was fully intent on playing Viscerae in Vegas, and I probably still will. Whether or not it'll be OTK, we'll see. But I'm also really curious for anyone that's been looking at that game and that list. I don't even know how to begin to approach. As the winner said, he thinks he can consistently hit the OTK by turn 4 or 5. And so going back to my chain note from earlier, if you can actually pull that off by turn 5, you can consistently beat chain to the punch, which is amazing because I think right now chain is the kind of the speed gold standard. So I'm curious to see if the meta can adjust to that and speed that up. Let's see. Evan's saying, isn't the minimum for Road to National 32? Are there actually 24-person events? I don't think there's a minimum. I think there's a minimum cap. Like you have to be able to host at least this many. But if not enough sign up, I don't think the event gets canceled or anything. Danny's saying he's got a friend in Texas who made top 4 with Reiner. How big was that event, Danny? George saying chain versus aggro Katsu is a coin toss with a slight chain favor, he thinks. It does seem very... I think that's why a lot of people are on Katsu, because he is so reasonable against chain. Nick saying, did we get the links? Which links are you talking about? Yohani saying 40% chain. That's a big part of the mirror. That's totally right. I'm trying to figure out... McBobby Timmy saying, is Chains of Imminence a must now? I'm definitely going to be on Chains. I see too much chain, and we'll just break that down. So my tournament, my first opponent, Ross Vindo, was on Bolton, and this was a heck of a way to start. I felt so terrible. He had a big turn. He charged and he attacked. And then he forgot to give his attack go again as a reaction and specifically close the chain. And then the game kind of tilted at that point. But it was a good game. On the Bolton note, I want to pull up a list as I go through my opponents. It's not necessarily the deck they were playing, but I do want to just take a look at some winning deck lists using the heroes that I face and expect to see. Let's see. Termanimal saying, and Matt Rogers being a pretty notable player in a recent video talking about cutting snags. So I actually had 2 snags in my deck this weekend for the chain and Katsu matches, and I am absolutely switching out of them. I think it's a fine blue resource that Bravo particularly can use to just play big attacks or swing the hammer or whatever. But the essentially having it at the right time, it can shut down a giant Riftbind turn, which is great to have it at that point. But I am much favoring like Chains of Imminence specifically, because you can always play Chains of Imminence, and you call Seeds of Agony on a Chains of Imminence turn, and it's pretty typically going to prevent them from blocking. They probably won't block with it, but pitching like a blue Seeds for a resource or playing red and yellow Seeds out of their banish zone. So it can quickly cramp their style. Or you can just call Riftbind, right? If they are setting up for a potential big Riftbind turn, you could just call that. If they leave a couple in their banish zone, go into the next turn, looking to really make something happen. And I think that's a big part of it, is like, as these decks kind of refine for me, making sure that the vast majority of your cards are playable pretty much always. Getting caught on cards that are very specific, they need to really just win you the game against a certain matchup if you're going to have them in there for such specific moments. CF saying, I think you pitched them against me, Zach, in round 2. How you doing, Chris? Yeah, you were my first chain of the day, and man, that did not go so well for me. That was the game. So my strategy as Bravo against chain is pretty simple. In the first 3 or 4 turns, I'm trying to make the best exchanges I can. So if I can block and it prevents more than I'm going to be able to swing back for, I do that. But Bravo has some remarkably good hit effects, especially against chain. The 2 most prominent being Crippling Crush, signature card. Deal 4 or more, they discard 2 random cards. And chain hates this because he does not want to block, period. And so when you send 11 damage, for him to block enough to not take this hit effect, he has a lot of 2s in that deck, not a lot of 4s going on. So even if he's on all 3s, he's got to lose 3 cards. What this actually means, and I actually got Chris to do this, turn 2. In my second turn, I sent a Crippling Crush over, and he blocked with Carrion Husk. Now again, remember, chain is really only playing 6-7 turns. So even at turn 2, he's going to take 5 Blood Debt, but stopping 6 damage, so he's at 1 ahead on damage there. And if he stops this hit effect, it means he actually has a full turn on his chain turn. If he has a full turn on chain, that might do 10-15 damage. So getting them to use that Husk early is great, because then you know your hit effects later can probably land, especially with Bravo, you can get the Dominate. The second biggest hit effect is Spinal Crush. This is easily one of my favorite Bravo cards in the world right now. When you have 67% of the field being Katsu or Chain, Spinal Crush, hit effect, removes Go Again across the board. Phenomenal. Like an insane hit effect. 5 for 9, also a great ratio. That's a lot easier to pay for than Crippling Crush and also get a Dominate on. So you make the best exchanges you can early. You try to get them to use the Husk as soon as possible. And then somewhere around Shackle 4 and 5, you want to swing with a hit effect that they have to block, right? Or they have to have an awful turn. So this is Crippling Crush, this is Spinal Crush. And the kind of pinch you put them in is they don't block Crippling Crush, right? They take 11, you get 2 random cards. If you snipe their blues, or just whatever the critical cards in their hand are, then them missing once is a problem, because now they're stacking up cards in their banish zone, right? And they can only get so many of those out of turn, even with Go Again off of Chain. Which also means you're going to have another turn where you just get a swing. And if you can swing with yet another big hit effect, it can turn very quickly. So I ended up playing a couple more chain players, but against Chris, knowing my plan, right? It's good exchanges early on, cool. And I had a hand where I drew a couple of Spinal Crushes and a Red Pummel. And so just devastating would be, and he'd already used his Husk. So if I can send Spinal Crush, not even dominate it, he's not going to block. But then if I also get to pummel it, not only is it more damage, he now has to also choose a card to get rid of out of his hand. Kind of the worst of all worlds for him. And so I thought I'd put a Spinal Crush down. Instead, I put Red Pummel in my arsenal. And I should have made a note, check arsenal, with a lot of exclamation points here in my notebook. And so, we go along, and I'm essentially waiting for the right turn. Because I want to have the resources. I don't want to take a lot of damage from him. And at this point, I think he's going into 4 shackles. I can just wait until I have the moment, right? Take my 10 damage. I was feeling pretty comfortable on health. And then swing hard and hopefully create some problems for him. So the next turn comes, I draw back up. And so I drew another Red Pummel. And I had multiple Spinal Crushes in my hand. So when I look at my hand and I see that I have Spinal Crush and Red Pummel, it kind of reinforces the idea that the card I put down was Spinal Crush, because I had 1 Spinal Crush, 1 Pummel in hand. And I had pitched a different Spinal Crush to go to the bottom of my deck, because I didn't think I was going to get to play it, and I needed to have resources to play the first one. So you can imagine my devastation when my big turn comes. I take my 10 damage, and I look at my arsenal before I go to pay for it, because I have to play the card first, proper technique. And I have a Pummel and a Pummel in hand and a blue. So then my turn becomes Swing Hammer for 4. That is not how you win games, let me assure you. But going back to Bolton, my first opponent was playing Bolton, and he was on Bolton Sabres, which this is the combo heard around the world, right? So the goal of Bolton in the combo version, a lot of times when you see Sabres, is to play 2 copies of his signature card on the same turn. Lumina Ascension. This card is amazing. 0 cost. Your weapons gain +1, and if you've charged, You get to go again with each of your weapons. You don't get go again. You can attack more than once per turn with these weapons. And every time you hit, you reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a light card, you put it into your soul, gain a life. Otherwise, it goes to the bottom of your deck. So with the sabers, ideally, what they do is they play an attack that charges. Like this isn't the one they usually do because it costs a resource, but take flight. So they swing with an attack and they charge their soul and they give it go again using Bolton's ability. And then they, play Luminous Ascension. Their sabers are now +2. They have a soul that's stacked, and they want to swing with the saber, give it go again. If you block, it gets more attack. Swing with the saber, give it go again, and they can do that 6 times in a single turn. So the saber goes, gets plus from, I think ideally via Vanguard to also carry that over to the sabers, but it can easily be 30 plus damage in a single turn. So. And let me grab. Yeah, it's kind of a OTK style deck. So there's a one that I grabbed here, and this is Bryce Morgan's Bolton deck list from July 31st. Looks like he played at Multiverse Games and Comics, and I'm just gonna post this in chat, just so you can take a look at it. And so he's actually got Raiden and the Centauri Sabers, which I think is really clever. This is something I'm looking at, which is, can you have a deck that can play in different ways? So there are probably certain matchups where OTK Sabers is the way to win that game if you're going to win it. And they also have, of course, the Courage of Bladehold, which makes the Sabers free. I meant to mention that. So they pop that and they go crazy with the Sabers to do a bunch of damage to you. And then they gain life and they load their soul, and it can be really devastating. But the recognition on the Bolton side of things is the way to stop him, as far as I can tell. He's very card hungry. So he needs to charge his soul. So he's going to take some time to set up. And then he needs to have 2 Luminous Ascension to do this. Now he has, what's the name of that card? What up, I'm a sexy dinosaur. Is it Beacon of Victory? Yeah. Beacon of Victory is important to this whole Bolton shenanigan train. Because he can basically pump an attack. Let's say he does a charge attack that doesn't naturally have extra attack than it started with, so he can't just give it go again. So you can play this to pump for 1, and then search your deck for a Luminous Ascension. So you really only need 1 Luminous Ascension in your hand if, this is a card that you also draw into. So you have a way to kind of tutor for it. And so but the ability for him to be flexible, I think just having a deck that has to have the combo to win, probably not great. But I think Bolton Sabers generally is good, even if you don't hit the combo. But the reality is, for him to play his big turn, as an example, he's got to play a charge attack, card 1, charge it. So he's got to put some in his soul, card 2. He also, if the attack costs anything, you got to pay for it. So there's a 3rd card. And if it doesn't cost anything, all the zeros, you then have to find a way to pump, which is why that Beacon of Victory is so good, because it's a free pump that gets the card back. But if you don't have if you play either a 1 cost that has go again when you charge it, like Take Flight, you then have to pitch, and then you have to have the Luminas in hand and arsenal. So it's a full hand. So literally any removal of cards from hand stops him from doing his turn. And if you can remove enough cards, it can get really crazy. So in Bravo, as an example, early on, you just want to put a lot of card pressure on. They'll typically be okay blocking with a couple cards, which is fine. So that's where cards like Zealous Belting and Rousey Ancients get really important, because the ability to either play a big thing, Crippling Crush, obviously great, Spinal Crush, removing go again, getting rid of a bunch of cards, Pummel's another critical card in that matchup. But Zealous and Rouse let you go a little bigger earlier, and especially because Bolton's early on really not that scary. If he sends an attack at you, most of those attacks don't have default go again. So if you don't block it at all, you just take 3 or 4 damage. And so if you take 3 or 4, a lot of times they don't want to give it go again, because they actually need to load their soul up 4 or 5 times right before they go for it. And so if you just take 3 or 4 damage, if you have armor like Bravo does, you can technically get around weird hit effects. Like the one I always stop, let me find it. I think it's Bolt of Courage. Yeah. With my armor, because it's the card draw one, and that's the last thing I want to give them any options. Card draw is the number one thing I just want to stop all the time. But Rousing Ancients and Zealous Belting specifically let you, basically penalize them for not wanting to block, or not wanting to block. Really, they can block 5 or 6 pretty consistently and be okay with it. So if you can swing even, a 7 with Rouse and a 6 with your hammer, they're going to take 6 or 7 damage and be able, they'll start using their armor and stuff. Another card I was sideboarding into in that match was Mangle. Because a lot of times people want to block with Courage to get the 2 block. Makes sense, especially when you have a nasty hit effect on like Crippling Crush. And then a Mangle can really mess them up. And usually they can block it, but it's just going to take them a lot of effort. They're going to have to pay for a reaction out of Arsenal and put 1 in from hand and maybe use some armor. And then if you pummel it, it just gets bad. If you can actually just nuke Courage, if you're playing Bravo, you have that option. I don't think very many classes have that ability. So that's really Bolton, honestly. So early on, it's kind of like Dory. If Dory swings it with the sword for 3. And I did end up playing Dory. Let me see. That was round... I played 2 Dories. I played 1, 2, 3, 4. Round 5, I played Jesus. I thought I played... No, I just won one Dory. And I felt really great about that game. This was so I lost round 2. Again, I felt great there. That's the Arsenal blunder. But then in round 5, I was playing Jesus, and he was on Dory, and I felt great. But sort of like Bolton, early on, she'll swing for 3 at you, and just remembering she has to, for it to really matter, she's going to have to get go again. So if you block, inevitably they're going to have Glant the Quicksilver. So don't block. Don't block a blank 3 ever, unless you're going to die. That's when you do it. Otherwise, you just take 3, because they're going to have to play a card to give go again. Then they're going to have to swing again. So depending on how many floating resources they have, you just don't block that. So similarly with Bolton, they send 3 or 4 damage or 5 damage at you. It's really not worth blocking. You just take it, let them charge their soul. If they want to expend their soul to give that go again and do something else, that's totally fine, right? They need to load that soul in order to really go off with Lumina. Otherwise, just doing a little bit of damage and you can apply pressure back. And then in the late game against Bolton, if you can put card pressure on, whoever has that tempo is probably at the advantage, especially the Sabres version, because once they crack the Courage, as long as they don't kill you, they are still going to be card hungry. A lot of times they want to charge before they start swinging, or they just start swinging and giving go again. But that's really early on, I think, not that threatening. Next round for me again was that Chris playing Chain. Check your arsenal was my note. Round 3, I played against Keelan, who I almost played in round 1 and then had to do a repairing like you do. It's just customary at tournaments like this. And he was also playing Chain, and this was a really great game. But I didn't make my arsenal mistake in this one. So even when I beat Chain, it's usually not like by a lot. A lot of times I'll have 15, 20 health going into their kind of big turn, and then I'll weather the storm just enough that they'll kill themselves with Blood Debt. In the games that I won against Chain at the tournament, he was killing himself strictly. So you have to make the good exchanges early on, cause some problems in the middle, and then hope you did your job well enough for them to get knocked off. Though asking, hey, are we going to open more first edition subs for Tales or for the following set? So we're not planning to open any more spots for first edition for Tales. Optimistic that we might be able to do it for the set after that, but honestly, we just don't know. We don't know what supply is going to look like, and we don't want to overpromise or promise people boxes that we can't deliver on. I'm going to read some comments real quick. I've kind of been just rabbling on, see if anything's going on. Danny saying, good luck to Ranger appreciators out there, bringing in my Azalea to Road to Nationals towards the end of the month. Anyone out there been playing Azalea and doing well that feel like you have it figured out? If you do, find Steven. He'll be excited to talk to you. Chase saying, overblocking is also smart against Dory. Yes, this is correct. Presenting a block 7 on a naked Dawnblade can end their turn on the spot. And this is absolutely true. So a lot of times they have tricks, of course. But most of their pumps are +3 on Dory. And the biggest trick is Singing Steelblade, because that really turns some of their turns into +4. They get +1, then they go get the +3, then they get the +3. and they're off to the races. But the trick there is they still have to get go again, unless they already gave it go again. So you got to be careful to over blocking. And I did have a turn against Jesus, I remember, where I just blocked for 12. He had gotten a token, and then I just was not having it. It didn't matter if I would swing back for 4 or not with the hammer the next round. So I just covered it up completely, and it does often end turns. The note I had there, I made the mistake of mistakes against Dorinthea. You just can't make it. Every time I lose with Bravo, I feel like it's because I'm impatient. And I think he's maybe one of the most patient heroes in the game. But there was a moment where he played Singing Steelblade, which should tell you everything you need to know. And ultimately, I decided to let the first one hit and the second one because I had a big turn just stacked up. I had Crippling Crush and Arsenal. I had played a card to get extra intellect. I was ahead on health. I was ahead by like 10 or 15 health. And I had Red Pummel. So I was looking at a dominated Crippling Crush with Pummel to potentially just end the game, right? Do a bunch of damage, get him down to, I think he would have been at 4 or 5 health at that point, and then he wouldn't even have a hand. So then I just get a clear turn. So I decided to take the damage, and devastatingly what ended up happening is he had to use, I think the first card he drew, he played as Hit and Run. So he got plus to the second sword swing and go again on the second sword swing. And he had a couple floating resources after he swung. So again, I was looking at taking 7 or 8 damage, and then I'm going to hit back hard. So I let the second one through, and he draws a card. Command and Conquer. If you've played Flesh and Blood, you knew that was coming. But ultimately, I don't know if it was the wrong choice or not, because odds of him hitting Command and Conquer, not exceptional. But that forced me to block, so then I couldn't do Dominate and Pummel. So I had to decide to either just swing the hammer or just send a blank Crippling Crush through. And after taking, the 10 damage or whatever, that was just rough. That was a rough series of events. But I think if I had just blocked the very first one, right? You see Steelblade. The note I made is just cover up the Steelblade turn. I had an extra card in hand. It was the perfect opportunity just to say no. I think Steelblade is the card that makes those turns get out of control. And if I just shut it down, then I don't know. I feel pretty good about that game. Like I said, I built a 10, 15 point health lead, and that was sort of when the game turned on its head. Z Master says CNC called it. So then I played against Prism, against Steven. Steven was playing Prism in round 4, I think it was. Let me see my notes. Yeah. And my goodness, thank the maker. I think it was you, Matt from Texas, Oganako from our Discord. Just playing against Prism last week, you were playing I think it was, I'm not sure. I think you were on Prism. You were on the Aura version, and I used to think Bravo and Levia and Reiner just had these like really easy matches against Prism. And I think that's true if they're playing all the Heralds. It's like Herald of Triumph. We'll pull one of those up. Because Bravo and the Brutes have a bunch of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 attacks. And so when you block one of these Heralds, it kind of just ends their turn. Or, they use the Phantasmal Footsteps to pay a resource and gain an action back. And but they can only do that so many times. So, it's really easy for you to cover up their attacks with one card, and then they have to cover up your attacks with a lot of cards. But I played Prism last week on stream and had no idea what I was doing. It went okay. It was a good experience. But then after playing against Prism on Discord this past week and against Steven at the tournament, it's way more clear what's going on. And ultimately, they just run all these auras. It's like Genesis is a really important one, and then there's the one I said earlier, Merciful Retribution. And when they're playing with, what's the name of that weapon? Let me pull up this list. Where is it? Luminaris. That weapon is insane. So as long as they pitch a yellow, all their stuff gets go again. And it means the heralds, those giant herald attacks get go again, unless you obviously make them fizzle. But then all their auras get go again. So if they basically pivot out of a lot of their heralds into all these auras. And the problem for Bravo is usually he has one big attack. And if you attack an aura and blow it up, your turn's over. the text doesn't resolve. So even if it has go again, your turn's over. The only way around that is to have multiple actions. So I actually sideboarded into Time Skippers. Bravo has a ton of blues, so he can afford to play this. And the extra action actually lets him swing at the aura and then swing at the hero. I also come back to Rouse the Ancients, Zealous Belting. These are clutch cards in Bravo right now. The ability to send 5 or 7 at your opponent with Go Again, and then just pay 3 and swing the hammer over at the aura. When you're playing against it, I think you have to get rid of an aura every turn. If they have it out, you got to do it, and it can still go bad for you. I think that match is probably close to 50%. 2 equally skilled players playing that 100 times. I think it's way closer than anyone ever expected Prism to be against Bravo, which is cool. It's cool that a deck can do that. But ultimately, it's a tough match, and Steven did really great. He actually got Genesis out after I think I went first, and then I did my thing, and then end of turn he puts it into play. And he was able to keep it out way. I actively was wanting to get rid of it, but he, through like Arknight Sentinel and just shenanigans, just forced my hand and was able to keep it out. But Arknight Sentinel is expensive, and so it took up most of his turn to do it. And he would build some shields, and I was finally able to break through. And ultimately, that game just went my way, right? Slowly doing the Bravo thing, etching out a couple points here, a couple points there, and I was able to get it. But I think that game is fascinating. It's not what I thought was happening. When I picked Bravo, I was like, oh, I don't really need a sideboard against Prism because my deck's just kind of built to beat Prism. And turns out there's a little more going on there than I think meets the eye. Chase saying Bravo doesn't like dash mid-range. That's absolutely correct. You do not. He doesn't like dash of any color, as far as I can tell. Cesar says Time Skippers is tough, costs a blue pitch, hard to pay for 2 swings and skippers too. I think the Time Skippers for me is a lot of times you're on like a 4 blue hand, and so like you can pay 3, for the hammer. You have 2 other cards left. So if you have any of these attacks, like the cheaper attacks, or literally just being able to swing at the thing and put something like Showtime into play, or put what's the name of that card? Stamp Authority into play to increase your intellect and do that whole thing. Definitely some uses of it, but the ability to attack twice, I think, is relevant there. Maxie saying Bravo versus Aura Prism is one of the most skill testing matchups for both players and very entertaining to watch. It's definitely been. I was surprised at how much nuance is actually involved in that match, and you got to be careful. That Merciful Retribution, you swing into a bunch of spectral shields, and you just have to be prepared for the outcome that is you taking a bunch of damage straight to the face, which did happen in this game. But that was good. Then the next round was Jesus playing Dory. And then my final round, couldn't escape the day without playing against Ninja. This was Coley from Granbury, Texas. And he's playing Katsu. And fortunately, my brother has been playing Katsu since he started playing the game. So I played against a lot of Katsu, and this was a really, really good match. And we were talking after the game. He was a great opponent, and it was a great way to end the day. Just had a really good time, and it was a really close game the entire time. But 2 things. One, let's talk about a card called Rouse the Ancients. I need someone to talk me off of a ledge here. So this card goes in a lot of Bravo decks. It's blue. It blocks for 3. It costs more than 3, so it activates the hammer. If you draw it on turn 1 with 3 blues, that's a great way to start a game. Just like, in round 2, I'm getting +8, probably would dominate on a big swing. But I had a moment. Had a really good turn against Katsu, Spinal Crush, remove Go Again, Pummel. It's just great turn. And the next round I drew my hand. It was Towering Titan and 3 blues. And so I'm looking, and it's like, well, I could create a Seismic Sarge, and then I could swing the hammer for 6. That's a fine turn. Put a card in Arsenal. Neither of them I really wanted in Arsenal, but I could put a card in Arsenal and be fine. Or I can just take the turn, and I had him down, I think, to 11 health or something. Play Towering Titan, and go into the next round swinging for a whole bunch with Dominate. So I opted for that, and I had the health to spare, essentially. I draw my hand, and of course, wouldn't you know it, not only is it 4 reds, but it's 2 Zealous Belting, a Pummel, and a Spinal Crush. So even with the Seismic Sarge, I can't even play Spinal Crush. It was devastating. So I basically just created space for myself and then just passed for no reason. So he did his thing. I went ahead and blocked, created a Sarge, Seismic Surge token. I call him the Sarge. And was, just devastated. But this points at a few things that are really relevant. One, not going on tilt. So game 2, when I was playing as Chris on Chain, I made a big mistake, right? I feel pretty good winning the first game, but then game 2, I made a big mistake, ended up losing the game. And so it'd be really easy at that point to get kind of like in your own head and just totally go on tilt, is what we call, where you just kind of get flustered and start making mistakes. But you just got to stick. It's cool. You're going to have games. You're going to make some mistakes. And you just got to keep it even kill. Even here, it's like that can be a very frustrating moment in a game where you make a decision. Probably 98% of the time, you draw a Guardian attack, you can finish off the game the next round with Bravo. But again, I said earlier, pretty much every time I've lost with Bravo, I feel like it's because I'm impatient. And I felt like that was the patient move. And fortunately, I was able to still win that game, just barely. But that actually leads me to the next thing, which is something I heard a lot of people saying. And this is kind of just a tough love check, and it really doesn't have anything to do with Coley because he wasn't doing this at all. But after a game's over, you're hearing someone tell a story about it, and inevitably, they'll be like, "Yeah, it was like they were way ahead, but then I got him down to 4 health. It was a close game." But ultimately, if you really dive into some of the stories, a huge component of Flesh and Blood is that you're trying to create enough of an advantage to be ahead by 10 health at the end, right? 15-5, 18-10, like some spread like that, so that you can take a big punch to send back a punch big enough to guarantee you finish the game. Especially in Bravo, right? With Dominate, a lot of times I'm literally trying to be on enough extra health that I can just take the hit. And so I would challenge anyone that's going out to tournaments and wanting to do very well and wanting to improve, to really examine your games. And even if you're getting the score close by the end, that's going to be a natural piece of this. So for myself, if you catch me saying that on stream, if Steven's ahead of me by 10 or 15 health and then he lets a bunch of damage through because he can finish the game, don't get that confused with you actually being close, right? It's really easy to think that you're making good decisions and playing the game well at that point. But if you really want to do well, and I do, right? I do want to do well at this game ultimately, you have to be really critical of your decisions and your own performance, right? So this is something to be mindful for. It's something I see a lot of people doing in Flesh and Blood particularly. The final score, like a couple of these I'm looking at, is not indicative of how close you were or weren't to winning the game. Or because I think 2 very good players playing good decks, it is unlikely that someone ends with more than 5 or 10 health. It just is. And that's one of the best things about Flesh and Blood, is that every game kind of comes down to this moment where you spent all game trying to eke out advantages, and then who can capitalize on those the best. And that's where a lot of that tension comes in, because it's still anyone's game most of the time until you get down to the end. Ryan Rober saying, you learn from a loss more than you do from a win. That's, I think, absolutely true. Drayton saying tempo is a lot more important than health. Now, Drayton, he was playing Ninja this weekend. I actually want to look at his list. I'm going to share that real quick. I have this on FabDB. I'm going to post this in chat. So he was on Ninja, and he's notable. He got top 4. He didn't end up winning the event, but he was the 6-0. And I'll share that here. And I am excited. I was planning on building this deck actually to play today on stream before Steven was going to be gone. Because I've been playing a little bit and watching Ninja Turtle after I won that Pro Quest. But from everything I can tell, his is aggro to mid-range, and he probably paces it based on his opponent and what he's doing. But Katsu's really an interesting match, right? So we talked about how to approach Chain, and I said that I played Ninja here, but I didn't really break it down very much. And ultimately, there's a couple just sort of fundamentals with Katsu. When you see Katsu, they could be very defensive, like Flick Flack Red. Incredibly defensive card. If you're going a little bit wider, like in my deck, I might Zealous Belting or I might Rouse the Ancients. They can 0 for 4 with Flick Flack, block 4 of the 7, take 3. Then you swing your second attack, and then they can, drop any combo card in, typically blocking for 5. And that's a really efficient way to cover up. 9 damage off 2 cards blocking is super good. But Katsu can also be very aggressive. So they have the harmonized Kodachis, of course. And so it's taxing whether they're defensive or not, because it's Kodachi, got it, into an attack. And another critical card for them is Mask of Momentum. So if the third attack on a chain is an attack action card or higher, and it hits, then you get a trigger Mask of Momentum to draw a card. And so there's a few lines. I think the most common things you'll see are like Kodachi for 1. And then the second thing in an ideal ninja world a lot of times is Surging Strike, red. So this is a 2 for 5 with Go Again built in. And then assuming that hits, they might trigger Katsu's ability, discard a 0, go get an attack. Or maybe they already have it in hand. But the follow-up to that is Whelming Gust Wave. And so this line is pretty popular because that Whelming now gets +1, and it gains the hit effect of if it hits, you draw a card. And so, if you don't block the Kodachi, you don't block the Whelming, or you don't block the Surging, then they come in with Whelming Gust Wave. That is the attack you've got to cover up in that sequence. And they want to do anything they can to make that hit. So I think it's Breaking Scalers is a piece of equipment they can use to give it +1. They have Ancestral Empowerment. Also, apologies to Bryce. Bryce is at home. Had some people asking this weekend how we get these cards to pop so quickly when we're live. And it actually is a human typing stuff in and making this pop. John designed a system that's just remarkable. But just giving him a second to catch up. So Breaking Scales, you can crack and get +1, I believe, is what that does. Let me click on it and make sure. Because there's also the boots. I think they use Snapdragons, yeah. They also have Ancestral Empowerment, which is 0 cost, +1, draw a card. And of course, they have the darling of Welcome to Wraith, which is Razor Reflex, one of my favorite pieces of art in this entire game. And they essentially... I love the chat going on right now. So anyways, Razor Reflex, of course, both gives Go Again if it hits and also can get them to hit. And that one hitting is really big. The other common line that you'll see is Kodachi, then an attack. And so it's pretty common if they Kodachi for people to block the second Kodachi, because Mask of Momentum requires the third or higher to hit, right? So if you block the first one, they can still Kodachi again. And you basically really not done anything. And blocking 1, usually you're having to spend a card that could block for 3 on it, or maybe a 2 block. So it's a pretty common thing to take the first one, and that's just attacks. A clock on the game that's going to happen. Then you block the next one, and you really don't want to block Surging Strike because it has Go Again anyway, and it's a 5. So you spending 2 cards on it. Usually they're going to win that exchange a little bit. But then if you're going to cover something up, it's that third one. And this is where a couple things come in. Either overblocking, kind of like against Dory, or, and I didn't mention this against Dory, but, I'm sideboarding into, I have 3 unmovable, 3 Sink Below, and 3 Fate Foreseen. Blue unmovable, red Sink Below, and red Fate Foreseen. And those are really good in Dory and Katsu. Because in 0 for 4 generically with a card filtering ability, good, of course. But against Katsu and Dory, being able to react over the react is important. And specifically against Dory, being able to react out of Arsenal prevents it from being from hand. So a lot of the reprise stuff doesn't trigger. But being able to kind of block that attack, and then if you have to react over top of it, you're really just trying to prevent their hands from getting out of control. Because once they get the Whelming to hit with Go Again, now you're looking at, what's the name of that card? Hold on, let me find it. It's yellow. Mugenshi Release. So this is the classic Katsu line. I feel like I play Ninja 100 times better at this point than I did last time I was on stream. So of course, if Whelming was the last thing, it gets +1, it gets Go Again. If it hits, you get to go get a bunch of Lord of Winds. Now it's important to know, I didn't know this for a long time, but Lord of Wind is, you can only pump it by the number of legal targets that there are to trigger its ability off of. So a lot of times they can't really do this super early. They don't want to do this hyper early. Now, there's nothing wrong with surging into Whelming into Mugenshi into Lord of Winds that uses resources. I've seen that 100 times. That's another really prominent line. If they happen to have the cards, they Searching, if you let it hit, they get rid of an attack, they go get Whelming. You want to cover up Whelming because it's the card draw ability and it's the second attack, so you reset the chain. But then they play Muginshi at that point, which if you can't cover that up, now they're going to go Lord of Winds. And then if they get Lord of Winds, now they could Kodachi. And depending on what they have in their hand, they might play, like Command and Conquer to finish out that chain, which is pretty gross. Or if they have any other ninja attack. And then now if the Kodachi hit after all that garbage, they can trigger Mask on the third attack and they get a card in Arsenal and it just gets out of hand. So the number one thing I recommend against Katsu, if you can, is just playing against it. And there's some basic things you can learn to do, but start learning how their hands go out of control. And if you know anyone that is playing Ninja, like if you're from Edmond and you know Drayton, and this is one of the best things about these events, people want to talk about the games they're having, and they want to hear other opinions too. And so, just start asking people, even when you play them, no matter what they're playing, it's like, what could I have done there that you were like worried about or that would have been awful for you? And when you're playing as Ninja, there's a lot of little things that I remember Drayton talking. I don't remember the situation, but there was a moment where he was like, my opponent overblocked by perfect amount. Because if he hadn't, this happens, and then it unlocks this crazy turn. And that's kind of the story of Ninja. So let me look at my list real quick. Steven saying, get Tim to play. Yeah, he'll happily do it. So we talk about Chain. We talk about Katsu. I'll talk a little bit more about Bravo in a second. We talk about Bolton. Let's talk about Dash. So Matt Rogers of Flesh and Blood fame actually won a week or two ago using Dash, and I'll share that in chat really quick. This is a horrible match for old Bravo, and I'll tell you why. Let me pull this list up because I don't know the names of the card. I just know what they do. So we'll start with, let's see. Yeah, the Induction Chamber. I'll start there. Dash gets to go get an equipment that costs 2 or less, and here it is. So for an action, they can use a resource. If there are no steam counters on Induction Chamber, put a steam counter on it, go again. So using that lets you go again. Once per turn, attack reaction, remove a steam counter from Induction Chamber. Target Mechnologist Pistol gains, go again. So we'll pull up the pistol, which is the Tecloplasma Pistol. 2 damage attack, action, remove a steam counter from Tecloplasma Pistol, attack. So it doesn't cost anything to do this attack. It's not limit once per turn. You just have to remove a steam counter. Then the action on it says if there are no steam counters on Teclo Pistol, put a steam counter on it, go again. So you can't load a whole bunch on there, but costs 1 to load it, and then you can shoot it for free. And if you have the Plasma Purifier, not Plasma Purifier, that's a different card. Where's that? The Induction Chamber, loaded, you can remove a token to give it go again for free. And so what this deck's looking to set up is to get a couple Induction Chambers out. And then, some decks play it, some decks don't. But there's the Plasma Purifier, which is a similar item. You can remove a steam counter to give a weapon +1. A target Mechnologist Pistol specifically. And so, this is one of the few decks in Flesh and Blood that actually builds. And they're trying to get these things on the board. So naturally, the only thing they really care about doing before they get the stuff on the board is not taking damage. Because they're trying to filter through the deck, right? They usually have, let me see, Fate Foreseen is in here, Sink Below, Sigil of Solace, Unmovable Red, Tome of Faendel to gain life. Let's keep going down the list really quick. Sorry, Bryce, keep on typing. And yeah, that looks about it. Otherwise, they're just blocking. There's Command and Conquer and the classic stuff in there, but essentially, they're willing to block out turns, and then they just set up, and they're digging for these items. And once they get it set up, off of a blue, they can do a lot. They can usually fire the gun at least twice, 3 times. Depending on how many resources they have, they're firing for 3, and they're firing multiple times. And so this is particularly vulnerable for Bravo because he typically wants to play the long game. But his long game, a lot of times, is block using 2 or 3 cards, swing the hammer for 4 or 6. Block using 2 or 3 cards, swing the hammer for 6. Then when he has a good hand that he wants to play, he might not block. Or maybe he will block and he'll do whatever. But he's patiently waiting for those big turns. But Dash loves to have those defense reactions in Arsenal to step around Bravo's dominate. They're willing to dump all the cards out of their hand. It's not really that effectual to like Crippling Crush unless they have one of those equipment pieces in hand. Or like Spinal Crush, okay, they'll take a turn off or they'll just cover it up. So it's a very patient deck, and I think all those reactions and all the blocking, I'm curious how it plays the chain matchup, but my assumption is that it has a lot of really favorable exchanges early on, and then keep shooting when and where it can. And then Chain doesn't want to block, so he takes, instead of a Kadachi, this is a 2 damage attack coming at you. And they kind of just keep on rolling. Matt saying CNC pummel that Dash. I mean, they're not going to put the equipment in the arsenal, which is really what matters here. And then they get to choose what they discard on pummel. So effectively, you're getting rid of the arsenal card, which is fine, and you're doing some damage. But at least for Bravo, he can only do that so many times. Thomas saying in his experience, they don't even attack against Chain. They just arsenal something to kill Ursa and sit. So a lot of times they'll just play the defense reactions, block the cards, not take the damage, play cards like Sigil of Solace, and try to run the clock out against Chain. Termanimal saying all dash cards block for 3, so losing 2 cards to stop CNC is not a problem. Yeah, so even if you pummel it, they take 4, and they lose one of the 2 cards left, and so you did 4 damage, and that's fine. They again, as long as they get the equipment out, because once they have 3 attacks at 2 around, that's a problem for Bravo, because you have to block, swing a hammer for 4, and so usually on 4 they're either going to block and take 1, or they'll 0 for 4, cover it up. And if that's what happens, then they're going to 2, and then swing at you with something, whether it's Command and Conquer or one of the Dash just Mechanologist attacks. And it's just a very difficult race for him to ultimately win in the end of the day. Chase saying that the counterplay from Chain in the event that Dash is not doing anything is to let a bunch of stuff sit in Blood Net to have a mega turn against Chain. Which is interesting. I do think it's not as simple as like take Shackle, swing with everything against using Chain, and then you win your games. I think that will win. There are certain games Chain plays that he will just win. Like maybe 10% of the games you just can't do anything about. A good player playing Chain, let's say you'd normally go 50-50. Well, if you win half of the other games that you play that aren't the 10 to 15% he just gives you, then his win percentage can be at 60-70%, which is why I think you see so many of them in the cut and so many winning. It's just the kind of deck that gives you games and basically can cover up for mistakes made early because his end game is just so powerful. We also had Viscerae, which I was talking about earlier, and we saw a Viscerae OTK winning event. And then we saw Viscerae aggro / mid-range top 4ing a couple events. So both proud and a little sad. I was hoping to roll into Vegas on Viscerae with no one talking about him. But I think he's really good. I am curious to test out the OTK deck. I was planning on playing that again today, so maybe I'll get it on the table next week. And I'm curious if I have no really experience against it, so I don't have necessarily answers or a breakdown. But if, as the winner had said, I was saying earlier, if it can consistently win or hit the OTK moment on turn 4 or 5, then it might be a faster deck than Chain. And then in which case, I think the meta is going to have to ask a lot of questions. Because the difference with Chain is he's not taking some weird risk. Or not Chain, with Viscerae, 2 Chain. He's not building Blood Debt. You can't catch him off guard on that kind of thing. He's not decking himself. So a lot of times as Viscerae in the OTK match, perfectly fine blocking out a turn. Right? Digging for cards that create rune chance. Digging for cards that create rune chance. Blocking with everything but read the runes. Blocking with everything but read the runes. And then you have 20, 25 rune chance. You trigger Skeleton. You do our Sonata. You play big attacks. You have a bunch of go again. And he can just do a ton of damage all at once without really having to sacrifice over much. That said, he is, in a lot of cases, at least the OTK versions, not going to be swinging a lot because he doesn't want those rune chance to pop, right? He wants to build them so that he can OTK with that Skeleton. So I assume that decks that can put weird hand pressure on quickly and early. I think about Chain, he's really just doing damage, right? So if your first 5 turns against Chain is block for 9 of the damage, you're probably not dead, and you probably have a fair number of rune chance. And then you might take 1 turn with take a little more damage. After, let's say 1 turn you block for 9, put Mordred Tide in Arsenal. Next turn, you draw 3 or 4 non-attack actions, so you take 10 against Chain and then create 15 rune chance. I can definitely see how it gets there quick. George saying Viscerae can't block with his whole hand. Chain can actually block with his whole turn and advance his game plan. That's true. Nathan saying my local road to nationals is in Tennessee this Saturday. What should I play? Play what you have fun with, man. I think every hero can do just fine in this meta, and whatever you are excited to play is what I would recommend. George saying, let's see. Chase saying dash struggles against 1 big turn. It excels at my medium turns, trading with your medium turns. Yeah, so that's when I'm playing against dash. I'm less prone to just keep the pressure on every turn, and I'm looking to build. That's where Towering Titan is interesting. I didn't finish that conversation earlier, but I'm almost at the point where it's coming out. I need to test against dash a little bit, but big turn with pummel and a hit effect and dominate is a lot harder for them to block out. But that's where red unmovable just can be a problem. It can be a real problem. Hey, this is perfect answer, Zach. Exactly what I'd expect. Well, I don't want to get too predictable here. Maxi saying we have at least 1 top 8 showing for each hero. What's everyone's take on Viscerae OTK? What are you doing against that if it is actually building to hit you on turn 5? I'm curious. That's something I need to look at. I'm planning on playing Bravo this weekend, and some of the changes I'm looking at making. Let me actually see. There's probably... I'm going to go top down. Let's look at this deck real quick. Okay, figured that out. Then hitting some buttons. All right. Maxi saying I saw it played in person. Insanely good. The main takeaway is dash is just forced to race. Bravo stomps the OTK. Really? Tell me more, Wyatt. Wyatt saying Bravo stomps OTK. Maxi saying go crazy when Runeblade Barrier is up. That does feel like the risk. So that Viscerae deck uses Runeblade Barrier. It create if you Mordred Tide into a Runeblade Barrier, you create 2 from playing the second card via Viscerae's ability with Mordred Tide up. It creates 4 + 1 because of Mordred Tide, so that's 7. And so if you can swing for enough when that's up, though, you can blow up a lot of their rune chance. Wyatt saying any of the crush effects ruin them. Really? That makes me happy. Well, I'll try it. The go again crush effect seems bad. The discard random cards could be bad too. Tylen says the OTK Viscerae is a local to our community in Phoenix, and I have no idea what's going on when he plays it. So the things you have to know about this is if we pull Viscerae back up, when you play a Runeblade card, if you've already played a non-attack action this turn, you create a rune chant. So the most complicated thing that happens with him is that he's creating rune chants every time he plays a card. If Mordred Tide's up, that's 2 rune chants. And then when he swings, all those rune chants pop. And they're little instances of 1 damage at a time that are arcane damage. And so he just has a lot going on because he might have 10 of those popping, 10 coming at you with an attack. The attack has like a meet and greet. If it hits, it creates a rune chant. If you've dealt arcane damage, it gets go again. And so there's a lot of floating stuff. And then you throw in cards like Rattlebones, which is a 2-cost non-attack action that lets you play a Runeblade attack from your discard pile, essentially. But if you've done arcane damage, you can play it as an instant. So it hops in there. It has go again, so it generates an action out of nowhere. A huge fan of Viscerae. I've been planning to play him at Vegas for a while, but there is a lot. Part of what makes him so good, I think, is that he has so many different lines. Drayton says, I need to look at the deck because I'm curious exactly how consistent it is. The guy won the event and was saying that it goes off by turn 4 or 5 98% of the time. Nathan says, a good Spinal Crash before the OTK turn wrecks the plan and gives you an extra turn. Better hope you have it. Drayton says, Bravo is always super strong in the Viscerae. Nick's saying the winning Viscerae didn't run Rattlebones oddly enough. I don't think it's that crazy. So he's literally just there to block, gain rune chance, and then have his deck look at, 14 cards, put 7 attacks in that all can potentially have go again, and then have 25 damage come at you once in Arcane to guarantee you're taking Arcane damage, of course. Do the 6 or 7 off of Arcanics, and then do enough damage that you just can't possibly block it all out, right? Chase, I don't think OTK is that crazy, honestly. If you built the guy's deck, let me link that real quick. As soon as I saw it, I mean, it was effectively exactly as expected. You literally just don't take damage and you maximize your rune chance. There's more nuance to that, I'm sure. But ultimately, that's the macro goal. So as long as you're building rune chance and not taking damage, you're advancing the board state. Wyatt saying, essentially they need a good amount of cards in hand to create the rune chant, so Bravo can easily block the Arcane with all the blues, and then he can also apply pressure to the hand size. And I don't disagree with that. I'm sort of hoping someone's playing it this weekend just so I can get a rep against it with Bravo, but we'll see. Okay, so let's take a look at my Bravo deck real quick. I'll try to post this to the DB. I have people asking. It's not, I have nothing to hide. If you're going to be playing at Edmund this weekend, look away. Just kidding. It doesn't really matter. Bravo is not exactly, treading new ground 100%. There's some interesting stuff in it, but not exactly worried about this. There's that beautiful Bravo again. John saying, I agree that losing teaches you more. Back in the Panini DBZ game, my play group in Gainesville and Jacksonville, Florida, has been on running a deck no one thought was good enough. Probably lost a lot. And then you found a way to win. So let's see. 1, 2, 42. I think this is my 42 card. Let me pull up my spreadsheet here. All right. Command and Conquer. Crippling Crush. Pummel. Spinal Crush. Yep. This is what Zealous Bolton. This is what I was on Saturday. Then I had 3 yellow disable, and then a bunch of blues, of course, depending on how you're feeling. Let me find it. Something is different. Yeah. Then I also had Mangle as an option. Blue Unmovable is another one. So Mangle is the do 4 more blow up and armor. Blue Unmovable is a big defense reaction, particularly good against things like Dory or Bravo, dominate, hit effects, covering stuff up. I was actually on 1 Remembrance, and this is essentially any of the games I'm willing to be even more patient. If I end up in a match against like Ninja Turtle, then the game could go on for a long time. They're not going to do a whole lot. I'm going to swing for a little bit. They're going to block. They're going to swing for a little bit. I'm going to block. So this really lets you get cards back. I also play this against Prism. There is a aura that makes your attacks -1, and then there's I think Herald of Triumph also makes your attacks -1 when they're blocking. And so your 6s alone don't always cover it up. So that's a really nice way if you have to block early with like Crippling Crush to get it back in deck and either have it again to block or have it again to actually play. But also on 1 Tome of Faendal. In certain matches, the boots are the Mage Master boots that I'm playing. And when you're playing the Mage Master boots, the ability with Bravo to draw 2, gain some life, extend the game a little bit, and then potentially have a really big turn. Super relevant. Also on Blue Pummel in the sideboard. And so this was any match where my opponent is card hungry. Bolton's a really good example of this. Even Prism is a pretty good example of this, where just getting any cards out of their hand is going to be super worthwhile for me. Chain's another really good example of this. By the late stage of the game, swinging with the hammer for 6 doesn't really matter. It's not even about that anymore. So it's a blue I can pitch for rune chant damage. Most of the time there's at least 2 coming at you when it's happening. But then also if I just need to see pummel more often, that's why that was there. I also had Righteous Cleansing in, and this was kind of a attempt to tech for dash, because obviously they're looking for their equipment. So if you can swing big with Dominate with this effect, maybe even with pummel, if Righteous Cleansing hits, has 4 more, look at the top 5, you can banish cards. And so I'm just digging for the equipment. And there's also certain matches where specific cards set them up. Perfect example is Bolton. If you can hit this effect, he's card hungry. He's not going to want to cover this up if he doesn't have to. And sometimes he doesn't even have the option, right? If they didn't have like a Soul Shield or something in Arsenal, he may not be able to do anything about this. So if you hit, you can go get Luminous Ascension. You can go get Beacon of Victory. I think that's particularly useful there. Of course, they have the infamous now Towering Titan, which I won't spend any more time talking about because I'll just get angry. I had Stamp Authority. This is particularly good against anything that cares about hit effects. So I had a friend, Ian, what's up? Hope you're out there and hope you're doing well and you don't mind me sharing the story, who didn't realize that this line was on this card. While Stamp Authority is in the arena, attack action card effects do not trigger when they hit. So attack action card effects, that it's particularly good against like Ninja. Even Chain. I watched that Arsenal Pass video with Brendan talking about his Chain deck, and a lot of the really good Chain decks are on Plunder Run at this point. They're on Shadow Puppetry, they're on Meet and Greet, and so they actually have these like weird hit effects. Some are on Consuming Volition, but not that many. So Stamp Authority is a nice little build card, right? A lot of times you'll have a 3-card hand here. You can pay 3 to put this into play, put a card in Arsenal, go in with a 5-card hand, especially if you're on like Tome of Faendal as the card. Now you have a 5-card hand. It gets really interesting. I was on 3 Sink Below, 3 Fate for Scene. That's just games where defense reactions matter. So Katsu, Dorinthea, classic examples, Bravo, Viscerae, getting that defense reaction in Arsenal. Even against Chain, just having a 0 for 4 that filters cards is an efficient play. They run a weird amount of 4s, right? Bounding Demagon Red is a 4. What is the Unhallowed Rites, I think is the name of the card. That's a 4 in red. That's a card you're seeing a lot more of. When they're on Plunder Run, it's at +3. Any of the 3s when they have Shadow Puppetry are bigger. So just having a single card that blocks for 4 that does anything else for you in that match is just fine. And then I had 2 Snag to round it out. And that in none of my games was that relevant. I put it in against Chain, and it just didn't matter. I drew it early, pitched it as a resource, didn't have it when I needed it, didn't have an effect. So I will be looking to upgrade that to Chains. Other things I'm looking at changing, particularly, again, I'm just getting obscenely more patient. So Blessing of Deliverance Red, it was a card that was in my deck for a while, then I eventually went out because I was just messing with it. It itself is a 2 cost. So there's a lot of times when it is only healing you for 1 or 2. It does replace itself though. And I think against Chain, it blocks for 3, which is fine. And most importantly, so many times, if I just had a couple more health against Chain, I think I win the game. And so anything that is boosting the health is something I'm looking at this point. I also have 3 red Sigil of Solace, a card I have talked negatively about a lot. But again, early on against Chain, especially turn 1, is crazy. But at any point, knowing you can gain 3 life, even late, they think they're going in for the kill and they can't kill you. Super relevant. So I'm just looking at ways to extend the game, right? And to buy myself an extra turn or 2, because I'm expecting to see a lot of Chain. Then I'm also another card. There's some of these Fringe Bravo cards that I'm starting to understand, which makes me think I'm getting better, or maybe I'm getting worse. I'm just not sure yet. But Last Ditch Effort is one of those cards. So this is a 3-cost attack, does 4 damage, it blocks for 3. When you play Last Ditch Effort, if you have no cards in your deck, it gains +4 and go again. So it's really a 3-cost card that's a blue that also blocks for 3. That's kind of the trifecta for Bravo. He can pitch it. It's going to help make it where the hammer swings for 6. And in the event that the game goes really long, and you get down to no cards in your deck, it could be a pretty good card. Of course, 3 for 8 with Go Again, nothing to sneeze at. So we'll see. Because I'm on Sigil and Blessing now of some sort in some fashion, there are probably going to be more games where I'm going long, and I'm going to at least test if I ever get to the point where that's a useful card. And Jim making probably the biggest point, and this is what I was thinking about, which is in the mirror. So Bravo versus Bravo, that this can make all the difference. Whoever can just have health longer probably ends up the victor, and then finishing the game off. If you're the first person to not have any cards in deck, it could be a tough turn. Nick, I am using Mage Master boots in certain matchups. So against Ninja, I'm on the armor boots. Against Prism, I was on Time Skippers. And then most other places, I was on Mage Master boots, because it's just perfect with Showtime, with Stamp Authority, anything that lets you brief your hand, and also you can still swing the hammer or something. But it's really just there for Tome of Faendal. I'm waiting until I draw it. I'm going to put it in Arsenal. I'm going to gain the 3 or 4 or 5 life and draw my cards and move along. And then finally, I have someone saying, Nathan saying, I think Command and Conquer and Bravo has too much anti-synergy. Red pitch only costs 2, not a fan of Bravo. I understand, and I go back and forth, but I think the number of defense reactions that are out there, and being able to clear, like you see Chain put a card in Arsenal, and that is just an incredible card in that moment. Matt saying CNC is the meta killer. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's too good in too many of the matches for me not to run it. Wyatt saying that he cut Last Ditch Effort, Stamp Authority, and Towering Titan for better blue attacks that block for 3, so that Rouse the Ancients is more consistent. And he also is on blue Lead the Charge. So I was on blue Lead the Charge early with Bravo. I just can't get into that card, honestly. Chase saying that he boards out CNC against non-setup decks. So if they have Plunder Run, Unmovable, Lumina, OTK, etc., then I run it. Yeah, I mean, it just stops so many of those buildy turns. And I actually think Arsenal is maybe the most critical component that I'm getting to a different level on at this point. That is the only way to really set up genuine turns. You know, Bravo has like Stamp Authority or Showtime to get extra cards, but the putting the card in Arsenal and being patient is you create the turns, right? You just create the turn. So ultimately, that's why I think Command and Conquer almost needs to exist. There has to be a looming threat for that, so that it's not just guaranteed. But it's hard for me to ever think about actually not being on that at this point. That's not an awful point. I think the difference, though, Nathan saying he cuts it in Bravo because he has Disable. So I'm looking at switching up to Red Disable, actually. I think the 5 for 9 breakpoint is really good, and messing with their Arsenal card is enough to get a lot of people to block, especially against Chain. I just don't think he can cover that up. I always want to have something that is going to tempt him to use that Husk, and then when he finally does, having a bunch of hit effects that are bad for him. Super good. And then, of course, I'm looking at getting Chains of Eminence in. I think that's particularly against Katsu, maybe against some other matches. But just be able to call a card and mess them up. Again, to me, I'm trying to make the best exchanges I can with Bravo against Chain, unless I have the turn. And so that can easily buy you a turn. You call Seeds of Agony, either the resource curve's horrible, they can't block with cards, or they're going to get stuck with a bunch in their Blood Debt Zone. And you have stuff like Riftbind that needs those non-attack actions to happen. And so that's probably worth enough against Chain. We'll see. I'm going to test it. Matt asking if I've experimented with lunching press spice. Don't let memes be dreams. It's on the short list. Steven really loves that card. It's blue. So anytime you're actually swinging, not the hammer, but just swinging with a big attack against Bravo, it doesn't matter what cost the blues are. And so having a card that can function as either a resource. I think the toughest part of Lunging Press for me is it's probably only going to end up being playable out of Arsenal. Most of the time, when I have a hit effect that would work if I had just +1, because a lot of people will block to where you're at 3. So I get where that's coming from. I don't have a lot of cards sitting around. Sometimes I have cards that threaten like a pummel. But if you are threatening pummel, now I will say about Lunging Press, if I can't threaten pummel, like if I just have a card in Arsenal, people are so comfortable. So many times they will block where it's just 3 away from the hit effect. So you need that 1. So that's not a bad idea. I currently have snags in deck, but I won't. Jim saying my chain matches are always close. I either win on 1 life or lose. Maybe I'm just a bad Bravo. So that's I see Nick saying, do I run snag? So I was running snag. I didn't like it. I could be wrong, but I didn't like it. I'm going to switch to Chains of Eminence this weekend and see how that goes. Nathan says, am I on blue and red pummel? I am on blue and red pummel in specific matches. I'm almost always on red pummel. And then any hero that is card hungry is when I will pivot over to the blue as well. Just because that discard effect actually... Pummel is a card I love. As a Bravo and Viscerae player, there are 2 heroes that love that card. But more and more, the fact that they get to pick which card they discard, it only really becomes troublesome if they block enough that you can still pull off a pummel and only have 1 or 2 cards left in hand. Because removing 1 of their 2 cards is usually really bad for them. But most of the time now, when I'm threatening pummel, my opponents are either clever enough to overblock by enough, or they just don't block it to care about the pummel effect, right? And they just admit that, like, well, I'm going to take some damage, but if you have pummel, I can't be on 2 cards because it just takes my turn away. And losing a turn is worth so much more damage than blocking, 8 or whatever it is. Matt says, last meme 4D chess discussion, have you played with 1 energy potion? I have played with energy potions in Bravo straight up. That extra 2 can be a huge difference. Threatening a pummel at all times, I don't think is a bad idea. I just think the game's really quick right now. So, like I said earlier, Chain's a 7, 8 turn game. You can't have a turn where you just don't have a block. And a lot of times you just can't have a turn where you're not swinging either. And so I'm not going to spend my Mage Master boots on an energy potion. But, I think it's a fine if you're blocking with 3 cards anyway, and then you play that as your turn. Totally fine thing to do. So I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but it's not necessarily where I'm heading either. Matt saying I would totally side out E-Pot. What's E-Pot? I'm looking. I don't see it. George saying pummel was more relevant in the crew meta when people are blocking ally. Yeah, I think +4 on the red pummel is still worthwhile, and you get the hit effect and the damage. And the +4 is significant because it also sometimes ignites the actual hit effect from Bravo, right? So if they have to overblock for pummel not to allow the hit effect to happen. And if that's the case, typically I'll just want even pummel. I'll just save it. But the blue only to me matters in people that are really stingy with their cards. Bolton's a prime example of that. Dana Ward saying, sorry, just joined. Do you ever run Crush Confidence? Also, what do you think about blue? Lead the charge. So welcome. Those are fair questions. So I was on Crush Confidence and what was the other one? Let's pull Crush Confidence. So I was on Crush Confidence, and there's the other 3 for 7 that makes their first attack cost them 1 more. I was on both those for a while. I was really obsessed with tempo. I had a lot of the 2 cost auras for Bravo that have go again. Like the, what is the name of the yellow one that gives your armor +1? Forge for War. So basic idea was that a blue lets you Sarge and play one of these go again things from hand, and then a second blue on top of that lets you swing the hammer. And then if you have a 4-card hand, I wanted to be able to do something with it. So that's where these 3 for 7s come in, where you could basically play a 2-coster, get a Sarge, and swing for 7. And then ultimately, I evolved to this. I think the hit effects on Crippling Crush and Spinal Crush and Disable are so relevant that I'm almost like a 3 for 7. You can do almost as much damage with a hammer without having to waste spend an actual card that goes away. And the hit effects on those are hit and miss depending on the character, right? So Chain not be able to shackle one turn, it could be relevant, but once he's at 4 or 5 shackles, an extra shackle doesn't really matter that much. Obviously, it doesn't do anything against Dash, which is like the worst matchup for this deck. And then even against Katsu, it's hit or miss. So Chain and Katsu, and then the other thing I'm worried about is Dash. So it's just not, the hit effects on those just aren't doing a lot for me. Yeah, if you can crush Confidence early, but again at 7, a single 0 for 4 means they cover it up. I was also on Crush the Week just a week and a half ago. I had it in my deck. 3 for 7. They can't play attacks with a base of 3 or less if it does 4 or more. Against Chain, this is phenomenal. So many of his attacks are just unplayable. But what I found is that between armor and just 0 for 4 defense reactions, you rarely see this hit effect. It's not common. And then even then, sometimes it just doesn't matter. They'll do like Unhallowed Rites into E-Strike for 7. And that's a fine turn. So ultimately, the refinement that keeps happening is finding cards that are just always playable, which is where things like Blessing, Deliverance, and Sigil of Solace come in as well. Because you can always play up to game 3. The opponent attacks, doesn't attack, whatever. Yeah, Obsidian. We tested a game, and he was... I played Crush the Week, but he had a 4-power Express Lightning in hand. So, didn't matter. Hit effects is irrelevant. Bobby's saying, what up, Bobby? Good to see your name. Love Zealous Belting. Great in Prism also. Also gets Gogan and not Phantasm. Yeah, I like Zealous more than Outmuscle. That's a good point. I was on Outmuscle for a minute. And Outmuscle is good against Prism because it's a 6. Cool. But ultimately, you are paying an extra resource. And if your opponent has a big attack in hand, it doesn't have Go Again. And so there were turns where I would have a good follow-up, but if I could have guaranteed Go Again, I would have taken the one less attack all the time. The other thing is in Bravo, that's usually the first attack. So the extra resource for it not being a 3 cost means that you can actually pay 1 to get the Surge off of that first instead. So it really just depends. I like Zealous Belting better. It's more consistent for me. But I definitely understand Outmuscle. Matt saying, have you seen lists where people are sideboarding E-Strike for Zealous Outmuscle effects? Pretty wild. Yeah, I mean, I could easily see that being the case. Those are fine attacks in their own right. But I mean, it's interesting, right? So there's the balance of trying to do what your deck is doing most optimally, and then also having answers for how you're going to play up against very specific metas, and then also having a sideboard that lets you mold your deck to give you better odds against whatever matchups that you happen to see. And I can't imagine, we were talking about this on the way home from the tournament, when we have like 20 or 30 heroes, just how phenomenal the meta is going to have to inevitably be. Because right now, it's pretty focused. Even now, though, I think it's wide enough that any hero could walk in and at least have a chance to make the cut, if not win, which is cool. But once you're at 20 heroes, sideboard is going to be impossible. So you're going to have to really make some decisions. All right. Any questions? Any thoughts? See some new people walking in at this point. I'm going to be looking at this list and tweaking it and trying to get some games in before Saturday where I'm playing again. So you're going to hear my second round tournament report next week. And we're gearing up. We're doing a lot of Saturday jam sessions to prepare for Vegas. I'm really excited about that. And then I think the Dallas calling is going to be notable as well. It'll be sealed Tales of Aria. I think it'll be a nice, just super nice break after the constructed season leading up to Vegas. But it's really cool. Like I said earlier, just being back in tournament season, super, super awesome. Daniel says, I'm really curious about Guardian since it's the cheapest to play. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to buy the tunic because you have the chest piece instead. And I think Bravo's a really good hero to start learning on, honestly. Jim saying good luck, appreciate that. Tylen asking if I tried time snaps and tomes. I have a tome in, and I am sideboarding time snaps for sure. Billy saying I'm going to my first armory event next week. What do you think is the top thing I should look to learn? Just getting games in is going to be super helpful. Finding out the sequencing, the timing of stuff, and the way attacks work. And just don't be afraid to ask questions when you're playing against opponents. Ask if they, after it's over, anything you could have done better, any moments where if you had done something else, they were really nervous you were going to do it. I think those are the things for sure. Hydrate yourself. Take a water bottle. A word from our sponsor. I'm just kidding. Steven's not here. I'll let him take care of that. Gruder saying, really enjoy how certain cards make lists simply due to the pivots playstyle rather than cards' individual power. I think that's 100%. There are certain cards that are more ideal for a deck, but they're really good in some matchups and really bad in others, and so you only have so much space. So you do have to start finding certain cards that can kind of be those pivot spots for you. Nathaniel saying, is there a budget version of Breastplate for Bravo, or just don't play him if you don't have him? Playing casually. I don't think his chess piece is strictly necessary. The armor's nice, and the Surge can be really good. But I think there's something to be said for like Heart and Cross Strap. 2 resources. I'm not sure I understand. Oh, there goes my watch. 2 resources for like an immediate on a turn. If game's only 7 or 8 turns, like a Tunic gets you maybe 2 or 3 resources. So I think there's a lot of play there, which is really cool. Nathan, yeah, I'm on 1 tome with Mage Master, and I think it's worth a lot. Daniel's saying, and this is why Bravo is good. So people in chat earlier were saying for me to cut Command and Conquer. That's another card that if you don't have to buy is super nice. So I think you can play Bravo really effectively without some of the more expensive cards, and you'll be totally fine. Yeah, it's pretty crazy watching the price on some of these things. We try to update our singles price on our website every Tuesday, and we only have first edition Monarch stuff in stock. And I'm probably going to buy some. There's a cold foil ebb and fold. A lot of those common cold foils are like way cheaper than I would expect them to be. And that ebb and fold in cold foil looks awesome. So if you're looking for any of that now, it seems like a good time because I think we're probably at like a low curve. Matt saying, how much is CNC now? So I think Command & Conquer, even unlimited, is like 100 plus at this point, which is insane. Gruder says bear markets are for the players. That's right. It's a good time to be buying if you're wanting to buy any of that stuff. That's awesome, Daniel. Saying he pulled a great library. There was at the store I was at this weekend, they gave away a couple random boxes to people, kind of as door prizes, and someone pulled the library out of the random box. That's crazy on Command & Conquer, especially even the unlimited one. Look at that library. Cool looking card. Yeah, that's wild. I had no idea. I remember looking at for a long time at Command & Conquer around $60, and I was like, I'll wait till it drops. And then it went to like 68. I went ahead and bought, which I guess is a good thing. Brent saying it's 104 on TCG Player at this point. Billy Fellon, hope Tekla Foundry Heart comes down a bit more. If you're waiting on something, I hope that's true. But honestly, I've never seen the past couple weeks the number of people saying, hey, I'm new. We're getting comments on our videos, views on our older videos, people in our Discord channel, people texting us via our community text messaging, which we've been mentioning a couple times, has been insane. So the thing I've said about any of the waves of unlimited coming in, people are like, now maybe the price will drop on boxes and singles and stuff. But really, if Legend Store keeps doing what they are doing, which is marketing the game well, and it's a phenomenal game, so it'll organically keep growing on top of that. I think all unlimited being in stock does is give a chance for new players to get into the game. And so if player growth is outpacing printing cards, then prices could keep just going up, even on the unlimited stuff, for as long as that happens to be the case. And there's a lot of people that play tabletop card games, and there's a lot of people like my first opponent. This is his first tabletop card game, which is an awesome thing to experience. So the recognition for me is sky's the limit on how much this could keep growing. and it'll be a challenge. It would be a challenge for anyone to print appropriately, because player growth is so hard to measure, honestly. Mr. Yao saying you need to watch the new Outcast podcast. They talk about us. You talking to me? That's crazy, and how great we've been for the game. Well, hey, if you're on our Discord channel, link me to that. I'd love to check it out. Matt says you're going to grind Tales of Warrior First Edition Seal on stream to prepare for Dallas. You absolutely know it. Probably after that set drops, that is what you'll see on stream between that set coming out and us going to Dallas for sure. Raven says, do you use Chains of Imminence in any match besides Chain? I could see doing it. That's a very high skill card because you have to know if there are cards when you have a 7-8 turn game happening. If there are cards on certain turns that would absolutely just wreck you, and you can basically say no thanks. Even if you've seen 2 Sink Below, but you haven't seen you've seen 1 Fate Foreseen, be able to play that and say Fate Foreseen, and they can't react out of it. Or if you have a really important card and you don't want to play Command and Conquer to get it out of your arsenal, I could see it going in. I'm not there yet. It's a targeted tool for Chain against right now. Obsidian saying it's my first real tabletop card game as well. I had no idea. That's awesome. Fab Sir Lionheart saying Fab got me back into TCGs after 8+ years away. That's awesome. It's an incredible game. Gruder, our little LGS in Northeast Ohio, usually averages 14 to 16 players. The Road to the Nationals event this weekend is sold out at 64. Yeah, it's something else. And the OPE program they announced for next year is the next level. So I'm very optimistic. But that also means that the price, even of Unlimited, could be pretty high for a while. So just be prepared for that and enjoy the ride. Daniel saying, yep, Fab is a great game. You get more consistency from having more copies of the same card and different pitch values, but each pitch value plays differently as well, so there's still variation. Yeah, it's really amazing. What up, Hunter? Good to see your name. Saying, living vicariously through you. Fun to watch you excited about a competitive CCG again. It's super fun to be back in, and like for it to be a new publisher that cares so much about people playing this game in the flesh and blood, in person at the local game store, in these local communities, is incredibly exciting. And to see someone doing so many things so well, especially a new publisher, very refreshing. Taskmaster saying, Fab got me back into TCGs after 3 years, and I love this game. I'm going to be getting a case per set for Unlimited. That's awesome. Mike says, I won my first game after losing about 10 straight against my son. This game is legitimately hard to play well. Absolutely. In some ways, it reminds me of the Star Wars LCG in that if all you do is everyone swings as hard as they can every turn, it can seem very simple. But the more you dive in, we're a year and a half in, and I am still learning stuff every time I play this game. It's amazing. Mr. Yeah, that's awesome. Saying the thing you referenced earlier was saying that our videos are why they started playing. I had a few people say the same thing, and it was really cool at the tournament this weekend. Basically, that they got introduced to the game through our videos, and then they brought it to the local store, and now they have like these awesome communities that have been built up at those stores, which is really amazing to hear those kind of stories, that the passion we have for these games and the communities that they created for us and the experiences and the friends, in any way that we are helping to make that happen elsewhere. Super exciting. I absolutely love hearing those stories and learning about that kind of stuff. Taskmaster saying he subbed for the Blitz Deck and Booster Box subscription. Appreciate it. We wouldn't be able to do anything that we do without our subscribers. So anyone out there who got in on First Edition or has signed up for unlimited subscriptions or the Blitz Decks, major shout out to you. The entire team is super grateful that we get to do what we do, and that we get to wake up and go to a job doing something we love every day. So shout out to you for allowing that to happen. Dana Ward, in your opinion, are the heroes we aren't seeing right now, Levi, Azalea, Kano, etc., due to the classes needing buffs or because the game is still new and players are figuring out the meta? I think it's a mix of things. I think that good players are playing heroes that are very consistent. I think Brute is one of the more inconsistent classes, high highs, low lows, thanks to the boots. And I think that Azalea and Kano I think Azalea is hard to play. Most of her attacks you can't just play. You have to play out of Arsenal. Arsenal is one of the most critical pieces of this game. So I think she can be played well. She has some really powerful hit effects. But I think what you're seeing is the less consistent characters are the ones that aren't getting played as much. And that's pretty normal. You have a little higher variance, which you can use to your advantage. And they're the ones that'll get silent a little bit. But I do think that Azalea particularly has some game. I play a lot against her, and I don't think she's, just based on what I'm seeing in the meta, I don't think it's an impossible task. And then Kano, he has 30 health. So if Chain is winning in 6-7 turns against a 40 health character, you can imagine that would be a tough pill for Kano to swallow. And that's true. So Nathaniel makes a good point, saying Azalea feels really good in Blitz, but in Constructed it's harder. So some of these heroes I think would be way better in Blitz, Leviah being one of them. The game's just not long enough for her to get penalized for that blood debt that she's banishing. So if you can start swinging big from turn 1, Reinhardt, same thing. I think they're much more playable in Blitz. Gruta says predictions on the first hero to reach legendary status. That's a tough thing to answer. Given the current meta, I could see Chain getting there pretty quick, but I have a lot of faith in the designers of this game. I think it's very well designed. It's very obvious. You can see the signs of them having a way of balancing stuff. And I won't be shocked if the next set has a lot of characters or a character that presents a tough matchup for Chain particularly. And maybe even just for anything with a lot of getting going wide. Bravo already does a decent job of it with the shit effects, and I'm hoping we get some more Guardian cards in this next set, if you know what I mean. So I could easily see it being Chain. He's very consistently good. The new way they're doing the system. In the old system, I would have maybe picked someone else because he had to actually win the call-ins or the big level events, and he's the kind of hero that I think can get a lot of people to the cut, but then can... people that know what they're doing and tech well can just beat him. And so the new system, though, if he's consistently performing well, even at Road to Nationals events, he'll eventually go away. So if I had to pick right now, I'd say Chain. I think he's really good. But, I think characters like Katsu, close to as fast, but a lot less of the risk. So if something happens to make Chain not as viable, I could see someone like Katsu crossing the finish line first. But I think it's too early to really make a accurate prediction. Ryan Roper, I think the meta has changed every set released. I wouldn't be shocked if Tales of Arise shakes things up. Yeah, I'm kind of expecting it. So Lionheart went to my Road to Nationals last weekend. There was a Viscerae. Wood was able to OTK his opponent at 39 life and take the win. Dory ended up winning the Road to Nationals. Yeah. OTK Viscerae is pretty crazy. Oh, is that true? Steven's saying I'm like an hour behind the chat. Oh no, Steven is. Oh man, I was gonna be very surprised, and I'm excited to see. Hopefully, we get Ranger and Guardian this next set, which would make Steven and I both very happy, as you can imagine. Yeah, I was very confused for a second there, Steven. All right, I'll. Any more questions before I get out of here? I've been blabbing on. It's a couple hours solid, which is pretty crazy, but super. I mean, I'll say this: after playing in my first Road to Nationals, I'm only more excited about this game, about the meta, about everything going on, about the community. Everyone was great, super friendly, even with some serious prizes on the line. It's still a great time. And if you are thinking about going and nervous about going to a calling or going to a Road to Nationals, I highly encourage it. I think they're going to be a really good time, win or lose, and a lot of really great experience for everyone involved. I don't think you're wrong, Ryan. He's saying a lot of reason Chain is so prevalent right now is that he's a lower skill floor than a lot of other heroes. It makes him easy and accessible. And I also think you can play him without buying much beyond Monarch. He's run a lot of Monarch-specific cards. And like I said earlier, I think an average player could play with Chain, and he's going to give you games you wouldn't normally win. And he makes up for a lot of mistakes you can make early because his in-game turns are so powerful. But I do think, in general, people are getting better against Chain. I wouldn't be shocked if by the end of the Road to National season, Chain's still popular, but I think the people winning, like he'll win less and less events week to week. I would not be shocked by that at all. Billy's saying, just want to say thanks for all the information. I'm really excited for the TC Armory Discord League next month. You guys are awesome. Hey, thanks for signing up. Glad you're a part of that. The community there is really awesome. If you're not in our Discord channel, anyone out there, I definitely recommend it. Great conversations going on every day about FAB and the Discord League on Tuesday nights. Even if you're not part of the league, coming to hang out, you can usually get some pickup games. Super cool, and the people there are really friendly, especially if you're new. Definitely recommend trying that out. Wampa Fruit saying, I'm taking Levia to my Road to Nationals in Canada next week. Good luck. Let us know how it goes. Gruder saying, when's the last week of Road to Nationals? I think it's the end of August. Maybe the first weekend of September as well. Then the second weekend of September is Vegas, and I think it's definitely over by then. Jem says, I'm glad there's 2 different Bravo lists going, so people don't know what's coming. What are the 2 lists? How would you describe those? Tyler asking if I've tried the E-Strikes instead of Zealous. I definitely have. So, Steven, the winning and losing list. Gruder saying aggro versus control. He imagines. I don't know. I'm going to switch back to the top down real quick. Let's see if I get this right. Ah, yeah. There it is. Jim asking, what are the Flesh and Blood podcasts out there? There's a lot of them. People in chat will probably be more familiar with all of them. I've listened to most of them at one point or another, and there's various YouTube channels and stuff. But some really good ones out there by some really good players. Cold Foil saying Arsenal Pass, Session Blood, and Outcast Haven. I have heard those several times, so I think that's a good recommendation. Drayton says, I'm on a podcast. What is your podcast, Drayton? Outcast Haven there in the chat saying we have one. Sorry for self-promotion. That's cool. It's related to the topic at hand here. Yeah, Sir Lionheart recommending DM Armada and Red Zone Rogue. Those are 2 I hear about. Definitely more familiar with DM Armada. He's on chat a lot here. Drayton says we have a new one called Kadachi for 3. Yeah, sounds about right. I'm glad you're not. I'm glad you get a TO this weekend, Drayton. I don't have to deal with your ninja shenanigans. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, hey, it's been great. It's been real. I appreciate all of you being here, honestly. And like I said earlier, huge shout out to all our subscribers, our local members, our content members. We would not be here without you. And your support means the world to us. And a huge shout out to everyone that's just hanging out watching our videos all the time. If you're watching it back, even not live, we appreciate it. And we love having all of you here. So I'm going to bounce. And hopefully I'll see you at one of the callings coming up. Going to a lot of those. And very excited to continue getting to play this phenomenal game with great people, of course, in the Flesh and Blood. We will see you guys next time.